Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next session, Artificial Intelligence, Augmented Reality, Virtual Reality, and Robotics in India's Medical Future. We have with us today emerging health tech companies to talk about this. Our panelists for this session are Dr. Zainul Charbiwala, founder and CTO Tricog, Mr. Niranjan Subbarao, co-founder Cyclops Medtech, Mr. Tathagato Dastidar, co-founder and CEO SigTuple, and Dr. Sudhir P. Srivastava, founder and CEO SS Innovations. They will discuss how cutting-edge technologies can transform the Indian healthcare system. The panel discussion will be moderated by Soma, Associate Editor, PCQuest and CiOL.
So technologies that once used to be in the realms of science fiction have now become the reality. Yes, we are talking about technologies like AR, VR, AI, and robotics. We saw how technology adoption took a quantum leap during this pandemic. People moved to digital platforms almost overnight, and companies and industries responded in turn. Did it help the healthcare providers to set aside apprehensions and be more receptive to new technologies? Let's hear it straight from the horse's mouth. Today we have with us Dr. Zainul Charbiwala, founder and CTO Tricog, Mr. Tathagato Dastidar, co-founder and CEO SigTuple, Mr. Niranjan Subbarao, co-founder Cyclops Medtech, and Dr. Sudhir Srivastava, founder and CEO SS Innovation. Gentlemen, the floor is yours now. Could you please tell us a little bit about the ground realities in terms of a newer technology adoption? Dr. Zainul, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Soma ma'am, and pleasure to be part of this session. So it's been about 18 months since we've had this the pandemic, the whole event unleash on us, and it's definitely been an interesting journey. At first, I guess everybody was very confused as to what would happen, how we would react, how the markets would react, how communities would react. But I think the first wave taught us things very quickly, and I think we were prepared very well. At least in the health infrastructure did build up before the second wave came. Yes, we did have a fair bit of an effect in the second wave. It was much worse than we anticipated. But I think the key things about technology is, I think as you said, almost overnight things got adopted. Digital platforms got adopted, got built. The people who were ahead of the game on the digital side definitely did benefit from this. And I think the main aspects of technology that really helped were things like teleconsultation became pretty much the norm, right? Getting a consultation remotely, something that was not accepted earlier, even by healthcare providers, was something that all patients really clamored for, and doctors really adapted and said, look, this is the time we have to change this. And so this is really the main change that happened is the healthcare industry really adopted technologies which they would have taken maybe 5 years to get to. We had it happen in 3 months to 5 months. So there was that real acceleration that happened because of that. I'll let the other panelists also chime in. I'm sure there's very different, diverse views from each perspective as well. Please.
Sure, Mr. Dastidar, you would like to start?
Sure. So I agree with Zainul on the accelerated adoption of digital. That has really been a huge change in the last 18 months. What I do feel is that while we have adopted the connectivity part of digital with open arms, things are yet to get to a long way when it comes to remote healthcare digital in terms of healthcare delivery. It's not just a consultation, not just getting a test report via WhatsApp. there are things to be done in terms of remote healthcare delivery. I think that on that part, we maybe the world as a whole is still lagging behind, and there is a lot of ground we can cover with the proper technology and the proper things coming in. So just imagine a situation where, I mean, say a person in a remote village needs a test done or some kind of a checkup administered. That today is still lacking, and that gap cannot be bridged by teleconsultation alone.
So I'll come to Mr. Subbarao. Did you notice any noticeable change during COVID in terms of tech adoption?
I agree with both Tathagato as well as Zainul. There has been a paradigm shift, and there's been an accelerated pace at which the baseline underlying technology got accepted. Okay, but that actually stops at connecting patients to clinicians, right? It doesn't go beyond that. Now, I read a recent McKinsey report which says that post-COVID, 70% of the patients would want to actually continue using remote consultation, right? But whether that happens or not entirely depends on how soon and how well we connect the dots and bring the entire ecosystem to a closed loop. Okay, today that is not happening. Like Tathagata rightly pointed out, right? A patient can actually reach out to a physician and go for remote consultation, but then if a blood test has to be done or if some other investigation has to be done, right, a patient still needs to walk into a diagnostic center, so it doesn't prevent them from actually entire remote consultation, right? As long as suppose we have a system where we can actually get the diagnosis to the patient's doorstep, right? So that will make a lot of difference, and that will ensure that the 70% that McKinsey talks about happens in reality. But I think it's a good starting point, I would say.
Dr. Srivastava, would you like to share your thoughts?
Certainly. I think, firstly, I agree with all. I think a lot of this is being referred to what the pandemic we just went through and how it accelerated in terms of basically telecommunications in the sense of video consultations and so on. And if you look at telemedicine, really has been talked about for a very long time. And it is truly really not telemedicine. It is just like what we are doing today, a Zoom call or some form of a video conferencing. So I think other than consultation, and so a lot of it is actually hyped up. And I think we have to look at it very holistically. And yes, pandemic taught us a lesson that, things got accelerated, but it only limited, I think, as all other panelists have also said. I think where I feel as a physician and having now been involved in the robotics and the opportunity that exists actually partnering with the telecom companies, utilizing 5G or very high-speed connectivity. We have ourselves developed whereby we did single-arm applications using ultrasound, and we could do it remotely using 5G. So I think beyond the video consultation, of course, they are important. But firstly, you don't get the entire picture. There is nothing like a physician, seeing a patient. Now, can we overcome that part in such situation? Probably not, because we are all stuck. But what else could we do? I think so somewhere we have to go beyond this and really get into the telediagnostics and teletherapeutics. And so I think as we move forward, and based on my own experience and what we are developing on the robotic front, we will actually be able to deliver the telediagnostics where a lot of these things actually can be done completely remotely controlled and in real time be interpreted or checked by various experts, and also possibility of delivering therapeutics in a possibility whereby through automation and utilizing AR, VR, and also various AI in terms of how do we arrive at certain decisions and what is the best thing for a specific patient. So I think it still is a long ways to go to when we talk of utilizing the technology, especially in the healthcare, to the fullest.
Right. So when we are talking about, connecting the dots with technologies, especially, emerging technologies, So another issue with Indian healthcare system is that it has been struggling with a deficient healthcare infrastructure for quite long time. So there are huge gaps in terms of access, affordability, and quality of healthcare also. So I will come to you, Dr. Zainul. If you could help me understand or you can tell us about how augmented intelligence can reduce some of these gaps.
Sure, Soma. So, you have to think about the Indian healthcare system really as two different, parts. One is the whole public infrastructure, and then there's the private infrastructure. Now, it does so happen that actually in the private infrastructure, our tertiary care setup is actually pretty good. It's world class. If there's a thriving medical tourism industry, in the tertiary care. It's really in the diagnostic space, or the maybe primary care and the detection and the really early diagnosis of conditions where the infrastructure is lacking. Now in the public side, there's a lot of good work happening, but just it's the size of the country versus the GDP, part of the GDP that gets spent in the healthcare. That's really there's a really large imbalance here, right? And I think it's well talked about. The government knows about it. I think it's just a matter of maybe at some point the government just putting the money down and spending more in health infrastructure on the public side, which I think they are doing. We are seeing that happening. Every budget the healthcare spends actually do go up. Is that enough? I don't think so. It needs to be, it doesn't have to go as far as some of the developed countries, but definitely we are lacking, at a global level, especially when you think about some of the WHO goals that we have set for ourselves. We need to do this as a country nationwide. Now, in particular, our company Tricog is focusing on cardiac health, and we we are sort of experts at diagnostics, in cardiac diagnostics, in both electrocardiograms, ECGs, and in echocardiograms, or also called Curie echoes. And what we've seen is that yes, there was somewhat of a drop in patient flow in both the private and the government, in the public sectors, but it quickly picked up when things started moving back upwards. Now, in terms of actually improving access through technologies, things like augmented intelligence, artificial intelligence, machine learning, the technologies that are bringing to bear, I would say, they are. I would like to use this cliched term in some sense, democratizing, quality healthcare in some of the more remote parts, right? So where does technology help? We talked about connectivity, and Tata said, very rightly, that we are only doing connectivity. Now, in our case, what we are able to do is use that connectivity to actually bring patients, or bring care to patients, even at in diverse locations in tier 3, tier 4, even in the rural parts of the country, through government partnerships and things like that, NGO partnerships that we have been able to do. Now, how has technology helped all of that? I think one of the key areas that we have is that while we have great tertiary care systems, it's also very little. I mean, the in our case, the cardiologist to patient ratio is actually very low, right? And so you've got all of these experts in these large cities, in the metros, and you can go to one of these tier 1 towns, and you actually have a pick of large hospitals that you can get to, of course assuming that you can afford it. But if you are in anywhere in the tier 2, tier 3, further away, you are 80, 100 kilometers, and in the cardiac space, time is really of the essence. So the further you are away from a good treatment center, the harder it is to improve your chances of survival. So what we've been able to do through technology is really use the AI pieces to, I'll just use it, I'll use the term magnify the expertise of a few experts that are part of our team, to really give that access out to other parts of the country, and even now even the world, especially in Southeast Asia and Africa, where we are seeing good traction for the same kinds of technologies. So I think that's really been helping on both the ECG and echo parts. We are cardiac focused, so that's been our experience.
So, I would also like to know from you how AI can be, helpful in predicting diseases and, in the treatment.
Okay, so there's a whole new set of research, and you might call it basic science, but there's a whole lot of research where, because we have a lot of data now, we can be predictive about some conditions. Like, for example, there's a very an important condition called heart failure. All right, so heart failure is basically deterioration of your heart muscle. Now, typically, heart failure could only have been diagnosed with an expensive test, which is an ultrasound test called an echocardiogram. And it's expensive for a bunch of reasons. Of course, the expertise, the medical equipment required for this. Now, what's happened because of the amount of data that we have, researchers have found that you could take a cheaper test, like, for example, an ECG, an electrocardiogram, and come up with a detection of HF with up to an 85% accuracy. It's not perfect. It's not as great as the gold standard, but an ECG is far easier to administer, and it can be done very cheaply and pretty much everywhere. Right. So it's areas like this that have become very exciting for us, where we are doing what we call cross-modality detections of conditions which would otherwise be far more expensive or intrusive to detect, but you do it with cheaper means, with where less expertise is also required, and of course where it can be done remotely. So that's really helping actually in what we do.
So what are your thoughts, Mr. Dastidar, on addressing this access and affordability gaps with AI? Also, you are working in the domain of diagnostics. So also, if you could tell us about how AI can help in reducing diagnostic time and errors.
Sure. So actually, I completely agree with Zainul on all the points that he mentioned. And what we work on is essentially what he said, but instead of cardiology, just translate it to pathology. It's essentially the same. So to answer your question, Soma, I'll take a real example. So we have a deployment of our solution, the blood testing solution, at a very remote village in Gudalur, Tamil Nadu. It's around 50-60 kilometers from Ooty, and that's a tribal belt. There are no hospitals over there. There is one hospital which has been catering to some 300 hamlets, tribal hamlets, and they do not have a pathologist. They do not have advanced lab equipments. So what our device does is that it basically now enables the doctors over there to prescribe a peripheral blood smear analysis or a urine analysis, which they wouldn't have done. And this can lead to early detection of things like acute anemia in children and different types of blood-related diseases in both children and adults. And we have seen this happening day in and day out for the past few months. And the pathologist has actually not gone to Gudalur. So the pathologists are still in Bangalore. Our own pathologists plus a few others who routinely help out that particular tribal hospital in looking at these samples and giving out a diagnosis for the physician over there to actually take the treatment forward. So this is I would say, a working and living and talking example of remote AI and AI in action. Now, the only sticking point there would be the cost. This particular hospital couldn't have afforded our machine. What made it possible was a CSR initiative from a large company. And they have pledged to do more. And the thing is that the cost is essentially a function of volume. If the volumes, if we have, these kind of technologies, not just us, there are multiple other startups who are working on this kind of things which can save people's lives. And if the volume of the adoption, I mean, the adoption goes up, the volume goes up, and that will automatically bring the cost down. So what we need is basically, especially for the underserved population, a push from the NGOs, from the CSR of corporates, from the government to increase adoption. That will enable the startups to actually build at scale and reduce the cost, and ultimately it will help the end patient, the people who have no access to a doctor or to quality healthcare today.
Mr. Subbarao, I'll come to you. You are working in the domain of VR. So, my question to you is that how AR or VR can be effectively used in eye testing or treating vision dysfunctions? And also, since we are talking about affordability and access, how cost efficient are these solutions for the Indian healthcare scenario in particular?
Yeah, okay. So let me do one thing. I'll just take a step back, okay? Now, we are talking of this huge imbalance that is happening in the Indian healthcare ecosystem, right? On one side, you have 80% of the population which don't have access to quality healthcare. And on the other side, you have 20% of the population who have access, but then that access is being shared by the rest of the country as well. So we have reached a situation where there is too little that is being forced to be shared amongst too many people. Now, why is this happening? Because, see, we are not actually nipping everything in the bud, right? So, see, there are various diseases which could actually be sorted out right at a very, very early stage, okay? Now, where does that early stage happen? In PHCs or in GPs offices, right? Now, in India, for example, there are about 25,000 plus PHCs and about 150,000 sub-centers, right? Now, they are quite a lot. The problem is, these PHCs are not actually connected to rest of the ecosystem, and there is no effective patient flow that is happening from one place to another place. So I'll give you an example, right? We have a product which actually analyzes eye movements, okay? Now, eye movements present some of the early stage indicators when it comes to various neurological conditions like strokes and tumors, okay? Now, today we have a product in about 400 plus clinical locations, but predominantly in private establishments, okay? Though 2/3 of those are in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, they are still at private establishments which are state-of-the-art infrastructure. Now, if the same thing were to be available at a PHC and as part of the regular health checkup, right? If a 2-minute eye scan could have been done, that patient could have been prevented from actually getting a full-blown stroke and actually cluttering up the private healthcare ecosystem, because they could have sorted it out at that stage. Now, if this effective connecting the dots happens, right, then a lot of problems could be resolved. Now, talking about VR, right? Now, VR is one technology which actually can play a pretty important role in actually solving this whole issue, especially in the field of neurology and ophthalmology, right? One classic example is there's something called as perimetry or visual field testing in ophthalmology, which is typically used to diagnose glaucoma, right? So this is a large piece of equipment costing about $20,000-$30,000, okay? And then what exactly does a patient do? Patient actually sits in front of it, and then there are light flashes coming from various places, and they have to just give tactile feedback when they see, if they see or not see, okay? And that builds some kind of a visual map, okay, on where all can patients see. Now, today, this entire perimetry is being replaced by $100 or $200 VR equipment, okay? And it can just be deployed anywhere, okay? And glaucoma is it's a huge issue, right? And if that can actually be sorted out at a PHC level with a small piece of equipment, then it's going to make wonders.
Okay. And, talking about emerging technologies, I will come to Dr. Srivastava. So you are working in the domain of robotic surgery. So robotic surgery systems are particularly very expensive, that we know. And probably that's the reason that the market is also very small. So what are the things that are needed to democratize robotic surgery in India?
Certainly, I think you pointed out it is very expensive, and In fact, there's a company called Intuitive Surgical, and they produce Da Vinci surgical robotic system. And when I was in the United States, I used it for cardiac surgery and did a lot of cases there. And but from the Indian context, it is quite expensive. It sells for somewhere around 15 to 18 crores, and then procedures are quite expensive. And if you take, we have over, based on the last information we looked up, over 70,000 hospitals. Of those, 30,000 will be 150 beds and up. And these are all multi-specialty hospitals. And we have only 80 approximately robotic systems in the country over the last 20 years. And that is absolutely dismal. And I think of course, the technology came from California, and they enjoyed monopoly for the last, I would say, almost 18 to 20 years now. And now there are more companies getting in. And it's just like anything else, when you have monopoly, you pretty much control what you want. And if you don't have a global and a humanistic viewpoint, you will never pay attention to what the real need is, or what do I need to do to advance the science, or to change the direction how the patients actually get care, or how we can look into the future. Is this how we are going to keep practicing what we learned over the last 50 or 60 years, or we are going to change it? And somewhere I think we have really slipped. And so essentially there is a very uneven distribution of the robotic systems. It remains economy and country-centric pretty much. So almost like 93% of the current robotic system, approximately 6,000 globally, which is also not very much for a population of over 7+ billion people around the world. And that also over 20 years. So it's really, it's almost, it's pathetic that, there's such a wonderful technology that we don't have to make large incisions on these patients. Patients can recover. We can do complex operations of all kinds, including heart surgery. And these patients can go home in 1 or 2 or 3 days and back to their functional status. But unfortunately, it's a complex subject in terms of when it comes to the cost, is the investment, it's question of the people supporting, or, are you interested in innovation inside the country? And although we have a lot of slogans that are going on that you hear about, the Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat, but somehow, at least when it comes to medical devices, we are way, way behind. And all we have to do is look around in some very small countries, and they dominate the world in terms of providing technology, a CAT scan or angiograms or MRIs and on and on. Pretty much all of these things come today from outside. Do we not have ability in India to develop? Of course we do. If you look at ISRO or you look at the DRDO, there are talents there. But unfortunately, the medical device development is complex. It takes time, a lot of investment. There's a regulatory risk. There are already existing technology. And so sometimes it is not easy. And so as SSI, or SS Innovation, I made it as having lived in the United States and left to come to India, and really found that it was a challenge. We purchased the robot ourselves that time back in 2011 for around 9 crores or something like that. I couldn't operate on patients because they couldn't afford, even if you offered a free service. So we have now developed a system that will be almost 1/4 the price of the existing technologies. And we are really focusing on, like what I use the term, and I know democratizing is another one, decentralize the excellence. Because see, I think everybody has talked about that, how in the tertiary centers, yes, you will find a wonderful group of doctors and doing highest level of world-class care, but it just doesn't filter through. And so I think using the technology, and particularly the robotic assistant, because the healthcare in underserved area or smaller towns or villages is a very complex issue. Patients or the surgeons or physicians who spend a lot of time studying, they want to go to a place where they can do the best. and we just don't have the infrastructure or facilities. So now the question is, how do you, all this will take time. And it's a complex problem for not only the medical community, but the government also, because there are so many issues to deal with. And so only thing that I see that utilizing the technology, we can reach out, and yes, it will take time. It won't happen overnight. But if we put all of our energies into it and utilizing a lot of these new things that are in the pipeline or already exist to their fullest, right now, a lot of, it's a hype about AI and all of these things, but it's very limited. Where I see all of these things working is literally we have mobile units, or you place these, things, and over a period, just like cell phones became very cheap, or so many other technologies over a period became cheap based on the utilization. So this will also occur in the field of robotics. And I think as we truly kind of develop things within India, because of cheaper labor cost and also manufacturing cost, but we do have to invest a lot of money in high-level electronics. We miss that. We still have to import things from outside and pay huge amounts of duty. So somewhere I think this will change, but it's kind of the government has to focus, because somehow private industries and private investors don't seem to put a lot of money into this thing in India. We were lucky that we were able to raise money, and we are raising money. But I think, utilizing these technologies and placing them in the rural areas, remotely controlling them in every possible way. I think the thing you talk about drawing blood to, delivering literally, the diagnostic, having a robotic arm hold an ultrasound probe. Okay, and literally you control it, program it, where AI will give you the best possible image every single time. You're not dependent on the human factor or human errors. And so all of these things actually, I think, will come, but it will take a tremendous collective efforts. And also, the other thing that sometimes, having come to India, we need to support things from within. And sometimes there is a tendency, can we do it as good as, United States or Germany, and that's kind of silly. It immediately shoots you down. Like you are put in a very different platform. Now you have to prove yourself. That should not be the case. They also started somewhere, isn't it? So we need to give encouragement to people, and I think it has to, at some point, become the government and private partnerships, because it's not just that we can produce robots at a cheaper price. Now, what about the electricity? What about the backup generators? What about the bandwidth? So all of these things actually will play part in looking at a bigger picture. And if you really want to change, it will take a lot of energy, but is it possible? Absolutely, because I think this will be the future. And India today really has an opportunity, if you grab onto it, that we can become a model that just because, we are not a very rich country, we are getting there, but we can deliver the care at much lower cost and decentralize this excellence whereby people don't have to travel from remote areas and so on. So I'll leave it at that.
So thank you, Dr. Srivastava. And, when we are talking about closing the gaps in the health tech or healthcare scenario in general, government is also giving a push in terms of, Make in India. So I would like to know from you all that how do you view the existing scenario for, medtech devices prototyping and testing in India? Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I think I can go because probably we have had some near recent experiences in this space, right? So we started off way back in about 2013. So typically in India, right, hardware is hard and medical hardware is madly hard. Okay, so it's insanely difficult. Okay, and it was even more difficult when we started off, and it took us almost about 4 years for us to get our first, field version up and running. Okay, but the journey from there to here, right? If I look back to 2014 or 2013 and compare it to what is available today, I would say there is spectacular change. Okay, though that is quite insufficient, there is quite a bit of change out there. Okay, so those days it was really very hard for us to actually get a 3D rapid prototype. We had to actually wait for at least 2 to 3 weeks to get one small piece of mechanical designing done. Now, today that has changed. Government is also kind of invested. There are many ecosystem players like, say, CCamp from NCBS, right? They have a sprawling campus here. And just last week, they opened a state-of-the-art hardware prototyping, rapid prototyping lab specifically for medical devices. And they've also gone a step further and actually set up a small batch manufacturing facility as well within CCamp, which is accessible and open to everyone. Similarly, NASCOM, through its Center of Excellence in IoT, right? They've also set up a good lab out there, and they're also doing a lot of hand-holding and support. So these things were not accessible back then. So it's definitely changing, but then still I would say, looking at the scale that we are staring at, it's quite insufficient.
I'll probably go next. So yes, we have seen a lot of change in the rapid prototyping field in the last few years. It's not just 3D printing, other things, more mundane things like CNC machining and all. There are lots of vendors who are there in Bangalore, Penia. If you just go to Penia, you'll find lots of vendors who can do very decent jobs for you at very, I would say, affordable cost. Where I think we still have a long way to go are two things. One is on the testing for medical equipments, the hardware testing. I'm not talking about the accuracy or the effectiveness testing, but the hardware testing. And the second is the large scale manufacturing. So in hardware testing, there are a lot of safety tests that any medical device needs to go through. There are things like electromagnetic radiation, electromagnetic conductance, and all these tests which need to be done. And there are certain facilities, and it is a well-known way of how to get those testing done. The thing is that rapid testing also helps in better designs, but the facilities available for such tests is very few and far between. And just to give you an example, there is a test for transportation which is called ESTA. It is part of the global the regulatory test that is done, and apparently there are only a couple of vendors or 2-3 vendors in India who do this for a country this large. And one of them is a sort of global vendor, and the price that they will charge you for that kind of a test, just to kind of shake the machine a few times and let it drop a few times to see how it stands up, the price that they'll charge you for it will make your eyeballs pop out. So things go like that. And when it comes to also manufacturing, I mean, let's say I want to purchase aluminum rods, or I want to purchase screws or ball screws or things like that. Unfortunately, we still have to go abroad. We have to go to either China. Now China is becoming very difficult because of multiple reasons. Then the other alternatives go to Taiwan or go to Japan. Yet, do we have the raw materials to produce these things? We do. And can we create the technology which can produce these kind of components in-house? I mean, not in-house, within the country at scale? The answer is yes, but we do not see it happening. Even in things like, say, injection molding and all, which are an essential part of any device. I mean, everything needs a cover, right? Where do you make that plastic for the cover? You still have to go to China. The vendors who are available in India just cannot match up to the quality that we have abroad. These are unfortunate, especially because these technologies have been around for quite some time. They're well known, well understood. There is absolutely no reason why it cannot be built at scale within the country.
So talking about these challenges, I'll come to you, Dr. Srivastava, since you are, doing your own, own bit in terms of Make in India. Would you like to, tell us about the scenario? How do you see it actually?
Surely. So I would say in hardware, there are, as has been pointed out by other panelists also, so there are companies that actually can produce good quality hardware. But you're talking about like covers and all of these things, these are bigger things. I think where we get into trouble, and we've been doing this thing for the last few years in India, and we have gone around literally all parts of the country to try to find things. And we do actually spend a lot of time. So yes, there are some good companies, but they are far and few between who can actually give you the precision that is required in medical devices. I mean, you're talking about literally micron level types of accuracies, or, and must have a medical look and everything else that goes into the medical standards, because you do have to get through the regulatory approval process also beyond prototyping. So the standards are very high, especially in the medical devices, because they're going to touch a patient. And so, unfortunately, I think we face challenges, and I think a lot of things have been already pointed out. The supply chain, we don't have the raw material, on and on. Now the question comes down as I mentioned earlier, electronics. We still import everything, literally, from motors to drives to harmonic drives, encoders, connectors. I mean, these are So what really is surprising and frustrating, all of these countries started somewhere. If you take China and India, roughly around in the 80s, we were parallel. They took off and we kind of trudged along. So somewhere, I think the emphasis and the dedication and the commitment is missing. There's a lot of talk, but not enough action goes behind that talk or the allocation of resources. Now, we can keep saying that we don't do it. So if we don't do it, we'll always be in that position. So if we just grab this thing, that yes, it is difficult, it is expensive, but at a point in time, we will have it. So we cannot keep just talking about the problems, that this exists and this exists and this exists. True. But what's the solution then? So the only way to turn this thing around, whereby India, and there will be so many other countries, I would say, in the next 10 years. And yes, right now we are going through a very global supply chain challenges, and everything gets delayed, unfortunately. And so, like we know some parts we are ordering, they're telling us 6 months out, a year out. Now, how do you, on one side, we want to just go gung-ho on launching our robotic systems. How do you do it? So unfortunately, so we've got to take this thing, and it has got to be sorted out at multiple levels. And yes, there are certain minerals or certain metals that just come from some different geographical, areas and so on in the world. True, but a lot of things actually can be done, because how do these other small countries do? Country like Germany or Switzerland, very small countries, or Japan, South Korea, they produce all these things, and we cannot. Sometimes you feel pretty embarrassed actually about that, why we have not been. And, when we look at, and, we can always kind of magnify the problem, but I think we need to really focus very systematically. And we don't have to solve every problem at one time, but we have got to start, let's say we start making motors that are of that standard. Yes, we make motors, but they cannot be used in medical devices. We still end up getting all kinds of other electronics, we do. So I think, and that is the only thing that will actually bridge the gap. And we can truly become literally like other countries have succeeded in exporting to others. How come China is exporting to the rest of the world? Could we not do it? We have tremendous intellect. I worked in China for 3 years when the early stages of our development, funding and all that, a bunch of it came from there. But I can tell you, just having lived there, and yes, there's a discipline. They can do a lot of repetitive thing, but I think the creativity that exists in the Indian mind, we've got brilliant institutions here. Unfortunately, they are great in theoretical knowledge, but practical is actually missing. Because we bring these PhDs and so on, working with us, and we can see that. So somewhere all this has to change, literally from ground up. At the same time, there are a lot of rich people in India. I do not know why we cannot get a group of people focused together. And yes, it may cost a few $1 billion in order to produce whatever others are doing, but at a point in time, we will have it. And there will be a huge return on that investment when that happens. So I'll leave it at that, but I think that, I know we are doing our part, and, I keep pushing, and I'm very optimistic. I think, if we keep driving and encourage each other, I think we can get there. Hopefully, in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll be absolutely self-sufficient.
Yes, we are all hoping for that. So, Dr. Zainul, would you like to add something on, on the Medtech devices prototyping and testing scenario in India?
Sure. So I think, Dr. Sudhir has rightly put it. I think we and Tathagato and Niranjan as well. So, I think things have improved considerably in the last, I would say, about 5 years. Before I was in India, I was in the US, and we were doing very similar kinds of prototyping. That was still, I was doing it at the lab level. And just I remember the way we would do this is we would have a circuit, we would have a design ready. In the evening we would upload it to a design house, and the next evening it would actually turn up at our door, right? And everything's happening inside the country, inside the US. Now the same kinds of things, currently we have to wait even for a fab house inside the country. It's 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It's actually cheaper and faster to do it from a fab outside the country, right? I'm just talking about this mundane thing that Tata talked about, which is like PCB fabrication, which is so important for any electronics manufacturer, especially if you're iterating your design at that stage. You do want that those sorts of quick turnarounds. I think things have improved a lot on the mechanical and the industrial design side. Tooling has become far better. Injection molding has become far easier. And I found that the pricing in India has become actually better than places like China. However, the kinds of precision necessary, as Dr. Sudhir said, is just not there here yet, right? If you are building something that can work in the in the 0.1 millimeter, in the 100 micron tolerance range, you're fine. But as soon as you want to go to 50 microns, 10 microns and below, it's just not there. You just can't get it, right? You have to go out. It's not that it's just not possible. I know of a few companies that are in the aeronautical space that are building components for the large airplane manufacturers in France and in the US as well. So it's not that we don't have the expertise or the machinery to do it. It's just that we don't have the investments to put in the capital expenditure, to put in upfront, to have the machinery that can get that sort of precision. And of course then you need to have the expertise and the skill to operate those machines. If they're not simple to do, even if you had the best machines in the world, right? So there's a lot of there's a lot of pieces in the ecosystem. I know that there is a lot of talk. I'm on some groups where there is some walk as well. There are government entities, especially in the Department of Telecom, places like that, where they are working with with the startups, with small and medium SMEs, to actually alleviate some of these concerns, and to even bring in investment through grants and things like that. It's getting there. It's not great. It's not a huge push. I think Atmanirbhar is a good push in the right direction. Um, I was talking to one of the fabs. I'm not going to put a name, but in the geography in Shenzhen, and they're like, the government actually subsidizes the high-end equipment for us. They don't have to pay for it. The subsidies are 50%, 70% subsidies, just so that they can get the high-end equipment. And the equipment is not made in China. It's made in Japan or in Germany or in Korea, and it's imported into China. But then they are able to create quality products from that side of machinery. And ironically, you try to import machinery from Japan, Germany, you'll be slapped with duties here, right? Forget about subsidies. So there's some of this thinking that has to change. Now, I also know that we are slaves to our own failures and successes. The government wants 100% success on every project that goes through, and of course there's someone on the line if that doesn't happen, right? And so there's all of that combines together. And if we let some of our guard down and allow some failures, but then let the process sort of kick in, with some of these grand challenges and contests, and there's good people in the country, and they want to change, like Dr. Sudhir, all of you. They want to make this change, they want to make this happen. They've been doing this, they've been at it for decade or plus, right? And but we just need a little better in terms of support and ecosystem. Funding, financial is always a big deal. If it comes from the government, if it comes from CSR, if it comes from some of the HNIs, that'd be great.
Gentlemen, many thanks for joining me today in this conversation and sharing your insights. Stay with us for more such interesting conversations. Thank you.
I would like to thank all the panelists for such an engrossing discussion.